Imagine living in a time when the Roman Empire was collapsing from within, where one man alone stood against the mighty Praetorian Guard, wielding nothing but a sword and his honor. This is not a legend. It really happened. During the chaos of the Year of the Four Emperors, loyalty had a price. While powerful men bought armies and betrayed Rome, one centurion refused to back down. In a world ruled by gold and ambition, his courage became a rare spark of light. Today, you'll discover the true story of Sempronius Densus, the centurion who faced betrayal alone, with courage. This is the forgotten legacy of a man who defied an empire to stay loyal to his oath. But before we plunge into this incredible narrative, make sure you are subscribed to our channel and have activated the notification bell. This way, you won't miss any of our journeys into the past, replete with curiosities about the grand ancient Rome. Would you like to know how Rome's instability sparked a succession of coups? Get ready. It is in this climate of tension that our story begins. The shadow of the empire. Rome had already endured strong and controversial governments, but Nero's death left a dangerous void on the throne. Galba, an elderly man, seized power believing he would restore the old order. However, the population was fed up with empty promises. The legions, accustomed to rewards, grew increasingly restless, questioning whether this new emperor, lacking much charisma, would be able to meet their expectations. During this period, the Praetorian Guard began to recognize its immense political value. Formed by elite soldiers, these men had direct access to the emperor and consequently growing power. It was common for them to decide who would live or die within the imperial palace, and thus, behind the scenes, intrigues started to form, creating fertile ground for conspiracies. Othon, who had once been close to Galba, soon revealed himself to be an ambitious figure, ready to do anything to seize the throne. With a convincing smile and generous promises of gold and advantages, it didn't take long for him to attract the covetousness of the Praetorians. Meanwhile, Sempronius Densus, loyal down to his last grey hair, remained steadfast. He believed that a soldier's honor was above gold, though he knew little of the coming storm. Do you think the decision of an old emperor could trigger an irreversible sequence of betrayals? Stay alert, because Galba's dilemma would lead him to a fatal choice. Galba's choice. Galba realized he needed to secure his succession and decided to name an heir. Piso was the chosen one. Young and good-looking, always clad in his noble Roman period tunics, he symbolized renewal. Despite his inexperience, Piso's hopeful gaze captivated part of the Senate. However, it also roused the fury of Othon, who considered himself more deserving. The streets buzzed, as in a massive rumor, that Galba had underestimated the power of his enemies. For many, Piso represented a weak link, someone easily manipulated by anyone wishing to approach the throne. Yet Galba paid no heed to the streets' whispers. He remained convinced that Piso, by virtue of his integrity and honor, would reign in Rome. Sempronius, whose sense of duty came before any personal gain, watched with concern. Rumors of bribery and conspiracy were circulating through the corridors. Still, he held his head high, proclaiming, "I will serve the legitimate emperor until the end." Little did he know that in just a few days, that promise would place him face to face with soldiers who once shared the same table with him. Would you like to know how a soldier can be corrupted by the right promise? We will now reveal the network of favors that Othon began to weave to betray his emperor. Othon's conspiracy. Othon did not rest upon seeing Piso chosen. Although he displayed a respectful smile in public, behind the scenes he was preparing his offensive. His trump card was precisely the Praetorian Guard, for he knew that if he could secure the support of those men, he would have Rome in his hands. Offers of gold, land, and well-paid positions began circulating in secret meetings. One of Galba's weak points was that he could not afford to pay out as many rewards. Old and lacking widespread popularity among the troops, he found himself unable to compete financially with Othon's promises. Meanwhile, the tension grew. Rumors of rebellion spread like wildfire through the camps, and Sempronius Densus, even as part of the high command, felt the unease of his comrades, who were no longer behaving as they once had. Gradually, the conversations in the barracks courtyards shifted from celebrating the glories of Rome to discussing who would pay more. It was in this atmosphere that Othon, with his calculating smile, convinced an increasing number of soldiers that Galba was unworthy of his post. The seed of betrayal had been planted and was beginning to sprout with full force. Imagine the sound of dozens of Roman sandals striking the ground simultaneously as a crowd paves the way for revolt. You are about to experience one of the tensest moments in Rome's history. The day of the Uprising, the fateful day, arrived, January 15th. In the morning, Galba and Piso were carried through the city in litters, gently waving to a few curious citizens, but without much of the people's euphoria. Suddenly, a disturbance began in the distance. Sempronius noticed that the soldiers' movement was different. It seemed less organized and more menacing. In seconds, the cry of "Betrayal" echoed through the streets. Soldiers of the Praetorian Guard, who had once protected the emperor, charged against Galba and his heir. Rage and greed were written all over their faces. Othon was not present at that moment, but his influence resonated in every sword blow. Without hesitation, Sempronius positioned himself in front of Galba. His expression showed that he would rather die than see his oath broken. The scene was chaotic. Civilians ran to avoid being trampled, shields clashed, and Galba, even while seated in his litter, tried to comprehend what was happening. Piso shouted in an attempt to calm the soldiers, but it was too late. Betrayal was underway, and almost no one dared to oppose the majority. Almost no one, except Sempronius Densus. Do you think a single man can stop an entire army? Wait until you see the courage Sempronius demonstrated in the face of his former brothers in arms. The Sacrifice of Semprônius. Sempronius had always been respected for his integrity. Even so, many thought that in that crucial moment he would succumb to the majority. But his heart burned with the duty to protect the legitimate emperor, regardless of the ruler's mistakes. Armed with his vitis, a symbol of authority within the troops, he confronted the mutinous soldiers and raised his voice in a desperate attempt to make them retreat. Yet fate proved cruel. The soldiers who had once laughed and drank beside Sempronius now regarded him as an enemy. They advanced with raised shields, demanding the death of Galba and Piso. Sempronius, though visibly outnumbered, resisted. He struck precise blows, maneuvering his short sword with the mastery of a battle-hardened veteran. It was as if all his years of warfare had prepared him for that very moment. Amid the confusion, Galba's cry echoed while Piso tried to flee. But the enraged mob pressed forward mercilessly. Sempronius fought until his strength waned, wounded multiple times, refusing to abandon his post. Shortly thereafter, he collapsed to the ground, quickly trampled by the very men he once led. Still, his valor became etched in the eyes of all who witnessed that scene. Have you ever wondered how such an act could have changed the course of the empire? If you're enjoying this story so far, leave your like now so we can continue bringing you such striking accounts of the Roman Empire. After such a tragedy, what would become of Rome? It's time to discover who benefited from Sempronius's sacrifice and what new paths emerged on the dark horizon of 69 AD. The Rise of Othon. With Galba and Piso down, the path to power was clear for Othon. Dressed in his aristocratic attire, he arrived at the palace to cheers from soldiers delighted to receive the promised payment. However, part of the Senate watched. This crowning with skepticism. They were faced with a man capable of buying the loyalty of guards, but would he prove to be a ruler worthy of the Roman Empire? Othon's first days in power were marked by attempts to win the people's sympathy. He distributed food, hosted games, and tried to erase the bloody memory of that coup. Yet rumors from the frontiers reported other discontented legions. Rome was vast, and ruling it with an iron fist did not always guarantee stability. Meanwhile, the memory of Sempronius Densus spread among ordinary citizens who still revered bravery over any political maneuvering. Songs and verses began to emerge, extolling the Centurion who had fought alone against his own comrades in uniform. It was the first hint that despite all the corruption, true honor still had a place in the hearts of many Romans. Get ready to understand how the consequences of one single day's events spread, affecting the entire empire and triggering new conflicts. Reflections of Betrayal. The news of Galba's downfall spread quickly, reaching the farthest provinces of the Roman Empire. Some generals considered Othon a usurper without legitimacy. Amid this instability, other claimants to the throne emerged. The fever to conquer Rome was spreading, as it was known that raising loyal troops was possible if one promised more resources and prestige than the current emperor. Othon, for his part, had to deal with growing pressure. He needed to consolidate his position quickly or risk losing everything. He attempted to send emissaries to negotiate truces or alliances, but each military leader seemed more interested in pursuing his own plans. The loyalty of the troops had become a luxury. Amid this political whirlwind, the name of Sempronius Densus still echoed in conversations. Many regarded him as a hero who had died unjustly. Simple people said that if Rome had more men like him, its course would have been less bloody, but the reality was harsh. Bravery did not fill the army's coffers, nor did it sustain the alliances that upheld the empire. Have you ever imagined how the memory of a true hero could withstand the storms of time? Let's see how Sempronius's example survived the political upheavals. The Legacy of Semprônius. Even without leaving illustrious descendants or great wealth, Sempronius Densus was remembered in the accounts of some Roman historians. His deed, fighting against his fellow soldiers because he believed in the legitimacy of the emperor, took on almost mythical proportions. Some families recounted his story to their children as an exemplar of honor. Some poets of ancient Rome even dared to compose verses recounting that fateful combat, describing the Centurion in his gleaming armor, raising his staff, attempting to stem the tide of violence. In this way, his memory became a spark of hope. Even in cruel times, there were still those willing to fight for what they believed was right. At this point, it becomes clear that the year 69 AD was marked not only by the incessant change of emperors, but also by the sacrifice of a simple man who chose to fall fighting for honor rather than survive for profit. Are you ready to dive into the next bloody conflicts that would shake Rome? Get ready, for the struggle for power was far from over. Othon and His Rivals. No sooner had Othon seized power than Vitellius, a commander of troops in Germania, proclaimed himself emperor. Discontent with the way Othon had ascended the throne, Vitellius united entire legions to his side. Within a few months, a confrontation became inevitable. Two Roman military forces were marching toward a direct clash. On the battlefield, Othon tried to maintain control, still relying on the very Praetorian Guard that had helped him ascend. However, Vitellius had soldiers experienced in the harsh conditions of the frontiers. Once again, Othon found himself facing a challenge that could not simply be bought with money. History tells us that Othon's defeat was swift. He would lose his brief empire, while Rome witnessed in disbelief yet another change of ruler. Galba, Othon, Vitellius, all succeeded one another in a very short span, leaving the city in a constant state of alert. And thus continued the Year of the Four Emperors, marked by battles and uncertainties. Are you ready to find out how this succession of events culminated in a dramatic finale? Make no mistake, the seed of honor left by Sempronius blossomed amid the ruins of so many power struggles. The outcome and the call for reflection. After Vitellius, Vespasian would eventually emerge to finally put an end to the chaotic cycle. Yet despite so many tragedies and power plays, the memory of Sempronius Densus persisted among the people. Those who had seen him fight, or who had heard his name mentioned in salons and taverns, understood that even in the darkest times, a single act of courage can light a path of hope. As the years passed, Rome continued its expansion, facing new challenges and conquests. The Praetorian Guard remained a key player in political affairs, and palace intrigues never ceased. But the legacy left by the Centurion echoed like a discordant voice, questioning the unbridled pursuit of power and reminding everyone that loyalty was a non-negotiable value. And so, the Roman Empire continued, but it would never forget the tragic consequences of that morning when one man, armed only with his sword and his honor, challenged an entire army. Perhaps that is the greatest gift Sempronius Densus left for posterity, the idea that dignity can indeed prevail, even amid darkness. If this story inspired you in any way, subscribe to our channel now, leave your like, and share with your friends. Together, let's keep alive the memory and the lessons of ancient Rome, honoring names like Sempronius and ensuring that his sacrifice echoes through the centuries.